The words hit me like a physical blow. "Grandmama Rose, you smell like mothballs," my 17-year-old granddaughter Sophia announced loudly at the restaurant, her nose wrinkled in disgust as she scooted her chair away from me. The entire dining room at Chez Laurent seemed to go silent, every eye turning toward our table where I sat in my vintage Chanel suit, the one I'd worn to celebrate her acceptance to Princeton. I watched as Sophia's friends giggled behind their hands, their eyes filled with the casual cruelty that only teenagers can master. My heart crumbled as I realized that to her, I wasn't Rose Evangeline Beaumont, former perfume heiress and fragrance expert. I was just an embarrassing old woman who smelled wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I had raised Sophia since she was 7 years old after my daughter Catherine died in that terrible car accident. For 10 years, I had been mother and grandmother combined, sacrificing everything to give this girl the love and stability she needed. I'd paid for her private schools, her riding lessons, her European summer trips. I'd sat through every recital, every graduation, every milestone moment that mattered. And now, on what should have been a celebration of her future, she had publicly humiliated me over something as trivial as the way I smelled. The truth was, I didn't smell like mothballs. I wore Ambre Mystique, a rare vintage fragrance from 1963 that cost more per ounce than most people's monthly rent. But to Sophia's untrained nose, raised on synthetic department store perfumes and celebrity fragrances, my exquisite vintage scent probably did smell old-fashioned and strange. What she didn't know was that the small crystal bottle I kept on my vanity contained one of only 12 remaining samples of a fragrance that had been discontinued for 40 years. What none of them knew was that I owned the largest private collection of rare and vintage perfumes in North America. Hidden away in my climate-controlled vault beneath my Beacon Hill mansion were over 3,000 bottles, some dating back to the early 1900s. Perfumes from legendary houses that no longer existed. Custom blends created for royalty. One-of-a-kind samples from master perfumers whose work now sold at auction for tens of thousands of dollars per bottle. The collection was worth somewhere between $8 and $12 million, depending on market conditions. But as I sat there watching Sophia laugh with her friends about her embarrassing grandmother, who smelled like an old attic, I realized she had no idea about any of it. To her, I was just Rose, the woman who nagged her about homework and made her turn down the music. She had no appreciation for beauty, for history, for the artistry that went into creating something truly magnificent. She certainly had no understanding of the sacrifices I'd made to build something lasting and beautiful in this world. The waiter brought our champagne, and I raised my glass with a trembling hand. "To your future at Princeton," I said quietly, trying to salvage some dignity from the evening. Sophia barely glanced up from her phone. "Thanks, Grandmama. Can we get the check soon? I'm supposed to meet Tyler at 9. Tyler. Her latest boyfriend, a boy whose greatest ambition seemed to be becoming an influencer on social media. Another disappointment in a long line of poor choices that Sophia insisted on making despite my guidance. I'd tried to introduce her to young men from good families, boys with education and prospects, but she preferred these shallow, directionless creatures who treated her like an accessory. The drive home was silent except for Sophia's constant texting. I kept replaying her words in my mind, the casual way she'd dismissed me as smelly and old. When had I become irrelevant to her? When had my love and sacrifice transformed into something embarrassing that she wanted to hide from her friends? Back at the house, Sophia disappeared immediately to her room, probably to video chat with Tyler about her night out. I stood alone in my foyer, surrounded by the antique furniture and original artwork I'd spent decades collecting. Everything in this house had a story, had meaning, had been chosen with care and love. But to Sophia, it was all just old stuff that cluttered up her world. I climbed the stairs to my bedroom and sat at my vanity, looking at myself in the mirror that had once belonged to a French duchess. At 72, I was still elegant, still carried myself with the grace my mother had taught me. My silver hair was perfectly styled, my skin cared for with the finest French creams. I wasn't some doddering old woman who'd let herself go. I was Rose Beaumont, and I had been beautiful once. I was still beautiful, in my own way. But Sophia couldn't see it. All she saw was someone old and irrelevant and embarrassing. Someone who smelled wrong and dressed wrong and didn't understand the modern world she inhabited. I opened the small drawer where I kept my most precious jewelry and pulled out the key to my perfume vault. It was a small silver key that unlocked the temperature-controlled room beneath my house, where I stored my life's work. For 40 years, ever since my husband Robert died and left me with more money than I knew what to do with, I had been collecting these liquid treasures. Each bottle represented hours of research, careful bidding at exclusive auctions, connections with dealers around the world who knew to call me when something exceptional became available. The collection had become my passion, my purpose, my legacy. I'd planned to pass it down to Sophia someday, to teach her about the artistry and history contained in each precious bottle. I'd imagined us spending afternoons in the vault together, learning about the great perfumers of the past, understanding how scent could capture memory and emotion in ways that nothing else could match. But clearly, Sophia had no interest in learning about such things. To her, perfume came from the cosmetics counter at the mall, something you sprayed on carelessly before running out to meet whatever boy was currently occupying your attention. She had no appreciation for quality, for rarity, for the difference between art and commerce. As I sat there holding the vault key, I found myself thinking about Robert's sister, Miranda. Miranda lived in California now, running a successful gallery in San Francisco. She'd never had children, had focused entirely on her career and her art collection. We'd grown closer over the years, especially after Robert's death. Miranda understood beauty, understood the importance of preserving things that mattered. When I'd shown her the perfume collection during her last visit, she'd been genuinely impressed, asking intelligent questions about the history and provenance of individual pieces. Miranda would appreciate what I'd built. Miranda would understand the difference between a department store fragrance and a rare vintage Guerlain from 1920. Miranda would see the collection as what it was, a carefully curated museum of olfactory art that deserved to be preserved and treasured. The next morning, I made my decision. I called my lawyer, Theodore Ashworth, and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. Theodore had been handling my affairs since Robert's death, and he was accustomed to my occasionally impulsive decisions regarding my estate planning. "I want to make some changes to my will," I told him when I arrived at his office overlooking Boston Common. Specifically regarding my perfume collection. Theodore raised an eyebrow. He was one of the few people who truly understood the value of what I'd accumulated over the decades. "What kind of changes, Rose?" "I want to leave the entire collection to Miranda instead of Sophia." "That's a significant change. The collection represents a substantial portion of your estate's value." "Are you certain about this?" I thought about Sophia's disgusted expression at the restaurant, the way she'd recoiled from me as if I were something unpleasant she wanted to avoid. "I'm certain. Sophia has made it clear."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
"That she finds my interests embarrassing and old-fashioned. I won't force my treasures on someone who can't appreciate them." Theodore made careful notes as I outlined my new wishes. The house would still go to Sophia, along with a generous trust fund that would ensure her financial security for life. But the perfume collection, with its millions of dollars in value, would go to someone who would actually value it. "I'll have the revised documents ready by the end of the week," Theodore said. "But Rose, you might want to consider discussing this with Sophia first. Give her a chance to understand what she'd be losing." I shook my head. She's had 17 years to show interest in the things that matter to me. If she cared, she would have asked questions, would have wanted to learn. Instead, she treats me like an embarrassment. The changes were made official 3 days later. I signed the new will in Theodore's office, feeling a mixture of sadness and liberation. I was free from the burden of trying to force my granddaughter to appreciate something she clearly found worthless, and Miranda would inherit something she would truly treasure. But I didn't tell Sophia about the change. I wanted to see if her attitude toward me would shift, if she would show any genuine interest in my life and passions. I decided to give her one more chance to prove that there was more depth to her character than she'd been showing. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A week after the incident at the restaurant, Sophia's friend Jessica came to the house for a sleepover. I'd always liked Jessica more than Sophia's other friends. She was quieter, more thoughtful, and she actually looked at me when she spoke instead of staring at her phone. That evening, I was coming upstairs from the vault when I encountered Jessica in the hallway. She was looking at one of my vintage perfume advertisements, a beautiful 1930s poster for L'Heure Bleue by Guerlain. "Mrs. Beaumont, this is such a beautiful poster," Jessica said. "Is it original?" "It is," I replied, pleased by her interest. "It's from 1934. Guerlain was one of the great perfume houses of the early 20th century. "You really know a lot about perfume, don't you?" Jessica asked. "Sophia mentioned that you have some kind of collection." I felt a small spark of hope. "Would you like to see it?" Jessica's eyes widened. "Could I? That would be amazing." I led her down to the vault, watching her face as I opened the heavy door and the lights illuminated row upon row of beautiful bottles. Her gasp of amazement was exactly the reaction I'd been hoping to get from Sophia for years. "This is incredible," Jessica whispered, walking carefully between the display cases. "There are so many of them. They're all so beautiful." I spent the next hour showing Jessica some of my most prized pieces, explaining their history and significance. She listened with genuine fascination, asking thoughtful questions and treating each bottle with the reverence it deserved. When I showed her a bottle of Mitsuko from 1919, she actually teared up. "To think this fragrance is over 100 years old," she said, "and it still exists. That's like holding a piece of history." Finally, someone who understood. Someone who could see beyond the surface to the real beauty and meaning contained in my collection. It broke my heart that this someone was not my own granddaughter. When we returned upstairs, we found Sophia in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone while eating leftover pizza. "Where did you guys go?" she asked without looking up. "Your grandmother showed me her perfume collection," Jessica said, her voice still filled with wonder. "Sophia, do you know how incredible that collection is? Some of those bottles are worth more than a car." Sophia finally looked up from her phone. "She has a bunch of old perfume bottles in the basement? So what?" "They're not just old bottles," Jessica said, clearly frustrated by her friend's dismissive attitude. "They're museum-quality pieces. Your grandmother is like an expert curator or something. This is serious stuff." "It's just perfume," Sophia said, rolling her eyes. "Like, who cares about how something smells? It's not like it matters." That was the moment I knew for certain that I'd made the right decision about my will. Sophia would never understand or appreciate what I'd spent my life building. She would probably sell the entire collection to the first dealer who made an offer, never bothering to research its true value, or find buyers who would treasure individual pieces the way they deserved to be treasured. Jessica tried once more. "But Sophia, your grandmother could probably teach you so much about art and history and—" "Jessica, drop it," Sophia interrupted. "It's weird, okay? Hoarding a bunch of smelly old bottles isn't normal. I'm not interested in learning about that stuff." Hoarding? She called my carefully curated collection hoarding. My heart felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces. Jessica looked embarrassed and angry on my behalf. "I think I should probably go home," she said quietly. "Thank you so much for showing me the collection, Mrs. Beaumont. It was truly amazing." After Jessica left, I confronted Sophia in her room. "That girl showed more appreciation for something I've spent 40 years building than you've ever shown for anything I care about." Sophia barely glanced up from her laptop. "Jessica's weird. She gets excited about boring stuff." "I'm not into that whole vintage thing, Grandmama. It's not my vibe." "Your vibe," I repeated. "Sophia, do you have any idea what my collection is worth?" "I don't know. A few $1,000s? Does it matter? It's just stuff, Grandmama. When you die, I'll probably donate it, or sell it, or whatever. I'm not planning to turn this house into some kind of museum." There it was, the final confirmation that everything I'd worked for meant nothing to her. She would dispose of my life's work like it was garage sale junk, never understanding what she was throwing away. That night, I called Miranda in California. "I've made some changes to my will," I told her. "You're going to inherit my perfume collection." Miranda was quiet for a long moment. "Rose, that's incredibly generous, but are you sure? What about Sophia?" "Sophia has made it very clear that she considers my collection worthless. She called it hoarding. She said she'd probably donate it or sell it when I die." I could hear Miranda's sharp intake of breath. "She doesn't understand what you've built, does she?" "Not at all. But you do. You understand why these things matter, why they deserve to be preserved and treasured. I'm honored, Rose. Truly. And I promise you, I'll take care of every single bottle like it's a priceless work of art." Over the following weeks, I found myself paying closer attention to Sophia's behavior, looking for any sign that she might develop a deeper appreciation for the things that mattered to me. But if anything, she seemed to be moving further away from anything resembling sophistication or culture. She dropped her art history class because it was quote, 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 quote. She stopped attending the opera subscription performances we'd shared for years because they were quote, 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 quote. She began spending more and more time with Tyler and his crowd of directionless friends who seemed to find meaning only in social media followers and brand name clothing. When I tried to engage her in conversations about her future, about what she might study at Princeton, she showed no real passion or direction. "I'll probably major in communications or something easy," she said. "I just want to graduate and get a job that pays well. I don't need to be passionate about everything like you are, Grandmama." But I wasn't asking her to be passionate about everything. I was asking her to be passionate about something, to show some sign that there was depth and substance beneath her pretty surface. The final straw came 2 months later, when Sophia threw a party at the house while I was visiting Miranda in California. I'd left specific instructions that she could have a few friends over, but no parties, no drinking, and absolutely no access to my private rooms. I returned home a day early to find evidence that she'd completely ignored my wishes. There were wine stains on my antique Persian rug. Someone had been smoking in the library, leaving burn marks on the coffee table that had belonged to my great-grandmother. Worst of all, I found muddy footprints leading down to the basement level where my perfume vault was located. My hands shaking, I went down to check the vault. The door was still locked, but I could see that someone had tried to force it. There were scratch marks around the keyhole and dents in the metal door frame where someone had attempted to pry it open. When I confronted Sophia about the party, she was completely unrepentant. "It wasn't that big of a deal, Grandmama. Just some friends hanging out. I'll pay for the rug to be cleaned." "Someone tried to break into my vault, Sophia." She had the grace to look slightly guilty. "Tyler was just curious about what was down there. I told him it was locked, but he wanted to see for himself. He didn't actually get in or anything. He tried to break into my private collection, the collection that represents 40 years of my life's work." "Look, nothing was taken. No harm, no foul, right? Besides, why do you keep it locked up anyway? If it's so valuable, shouldn't you share it, or display it or something?" The casual way she dismissed the violation of my privacy and trust was the final confirmation I needed. Sophia would never understand or respect the things that mattered to me. She would never be worthy of inheriting something I'd spent decades building with love and dedication. That evening, I called Theodore again. "I want to make one more change to my will," I told him. "I want to add a letter to be read when the will is executed. Something that explains my decision about the perfume collection." "What would you like the letter to say?" I thought about Sophia's disgusted expression at the restaurant, her dismissal of my interests as weird and boring, her willingness to let her boyfriend attempt to break into my vault. I want her to understand that actions have consequences, that the way we treat people, especially people who love us, matters. The letter I wrote was not cruel, but it was honest. I explained that I had hoped to pass my collection down to her, had dreamed of sharing my passion with her and teaching her about the artistry and history contained in each bottle. But her consistent dismissal of my interests, combined with her lack of respect for my property and privacy, had shown me that she would never appreciate what I'd built. Instead, the collection would go to Miranda, who understood its value and would ensure its preservation for future generations, who might appreciate the artistry of master perfumers and the history captured in vintage fragrances. I sealed the letter and gave it to Theodore to include with my will documents. Then I went home and tried to rebuild some kind of relationship with my granddaughter, hoping against hope that she might still surprise me. But Sophia continued to treat me with casual indifference, taking my love and financial support for granted while showing no interest in anything that mattered to me. She moved through her senior year of high school focused entirely on social media drama and her relationship with Tyler, both of which seemed to consume all her emotional energy. When she graduated, I threw her a party and invited all our family friends and neighbors. I'd hoped it might be an opportunity for her to show some maturity and gratitude, but instead she spent the entire evening complaining about how boring my friends were and how she couldn't wait to get to Princeton, where she could meet interesting people. Standing in my garden that night after all the guests had gone home, I felt a profound sadness about how completely I'd failed to connect with the girl I'd raised as my own daughter. I'd given her everything I could, but somehow I'd never been able to give her the one thing that mattered most: an appreciation for beauty, for history, for the things that make life meaningful beyond immediate pleasure and social status. 3 months later, I had my first heart attack. It was mild, the doctors assured me, but it served as a stark reminder that I was not going to live forever. As I lay in the hospital bed recovering, I found myself thinking not about Sophia's reaction to my illness, but about whether my perfume collection would be properly cared for after I was gone. Sophia visited me in the hospital, of course, but her attention was divided between her phone and her obvious discomfort with the medical environment. She seemed more concerned about how my health scare might affect her college plans than about my actual well-being. "You're gonna be fine, right, Grandmama?" she asked during one visit. "Because I'm supposed to start at Princeton in 2 weeks, and if you need me to stay home." The relief in her voice when I assured her that I would be fine and she should absolutely go to college as planned told me everything I needed to know about where I ranked in her list of priorities. After I was released from the hospital, I spent my recovery time organizing my affairs and making sure everything was in perfect order for whenever my next heart attack proved to be my last. I updated my insurance policies, organized my important documents, and made sure Theodore had clear instructions about how to handle my estate. Most importantly, I spent hours in my perfume vault, cataloging each piece and creating detailed notes about their history and significance. If Miranda was going to inherit this collection, I wanted to provide her with all the information she would need to properly care for and potentially display these treasures. It was during this process that I discovered just how much my collection had appreciated in value over the years. Several pieces I'd purchased decades earlier for hundreds of dollars were now worth tens of thousands. The overall value had grown to nearly $15 million, making it one of the most significant private perfume collections in the world. $15 million that Sophia had dismissed as hoarding and promised to donate or sell without a second thought. $15 million that she would never see because she'd been too self-absorbed and dismissive to show even basic respect for the woman who'd sacrificed everything to raise her. As I worked on my cataloging project, I found myself remembering the early days after Catherine's death, when Sophia was just a traumatized 7-year-old who needed stability and love. I'd reorganized my entire life around her needs, given up travel and social commitments to be present for every important moment in her childhood. I'd loved her fiercely and completely, the way any mother loves her child. But somewhere along the way, that love had become taken for granted. I'd become just a source of financial support and occasional inconvenience, someone whose opinions and interests were irrelevant to Sophia's modern life. The recognition of this painful truth didn't make me angry anymore. It just made me tired. Tired of trying to force a connection that clearly wasn't going to happen. Tired of hoping that Sophia would somehow develop the depth and appreciation that would make her worthy of inheriting something I'd built with such care and passion. Miranda, on the other hand, called me regularly during my recovery. She asked thoughtful questions about my health and my spirits. She remembered details from our previous conversations and showed genuine interest in my well-being. When I mentioned that I was working on cataloging the perfume collection, she offered to fly out and help, understanding instinctively that this was important work that deserved proper attention and care. The contrast between my granddaughter's indifference and my sister-in-law's genuine care was stark and painful. But it also confirmed that I'd made the right decision about my will. 6 months passed. Sophia settled into college life and seemed to be thriving in the social environment that Princeton provided. Her phone calls home were brief and focused mainly on her need for additional spending money or her excitement about various social events. She never asked about my health, about how I was spending my time, or about anything related to my life and interests. During her winter break visit, she brought Tyler home with her. I'd hoped that maybe college had matured her somewhat, that she might show more appreciation for our relationship and our home. Instead, she seemed more focused than ever on impressing her boyfriend and distancing herself from anything she perceived as old-fashioned or embarrassing. Tyler was even worse than I'd remembered. He treated my home like a hotel, leaving messes for me to clean up and showing no respect for my belongings or my privacy. When I mentioned that I collected rare perfumes, he actually laughed. "That's so random," he said. "Like, why would anyone collect perfume? It's not like baseball cards or something actually valuable." Sophia joined in his laughter. "I've been telling you, Grandmama has some weird hobbies. She's got this whole basement full of old bottles." Old bottles! 40 years of careful collecting, research, and curation reduced to old bottles, for the amusement of this shallow boy who wouldn't recognize true value if it was presented to him in a museum display case. That night, after they'd gone out to meet friends, I sat in my library surrounded by the books and artwork I'd collected over the decades. Everything in this room had meaning, had been chosen with care and love. But to Sophia and Tyler, it was all just old stuff that cluttered up their modern world. I realized then that I'd been mourning the wrong loss. I'd been grieving for the granddaughter I'd raised and loved. But the truth was that girl had never really existed. The real Sophia was exactly who she'd always been. Someone focused on surface pleasures and social approval. Someone incapable of seeing beauty or meaning beyond her immediate wants and needs. I'd been trying to force her to be someone she wasn't, someone capable of appreciating art and history and craftsmanship. But you can't force depth on someone who's determined to remain shallow. You can't teach appreciation to someone who's convinced that caring about quality and beauty is somehow weird or embarrassing. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Miranda and asked her to visit as soon as possible. When she arrived 3 days later, I took her down to the vault and officially gave her a complete tour of the collection, explaining the significance and provenance of each major piece. "Miranda," I said as we stood surrounded by thousands of bottles containing liquid history, "I want you to start taking some of these pieces back to California with you. I don't want to wait until after I die to see them go to someone who will appreciate them." Miranda's eyes filled with tears. "Rose, are you sure? This collection is your life's work." "Exactly. It's my life's work, and I want to see it go to someone who understands what that means. Someone who will preserve it, and maybe even find ways to share it with others who can appreciate its beauty and significance." We spent the next week carefully packing some of the most valuable and historically significant pieces for Miranda to transport back to her gallery in California. She promised to create a special climate-controlled room to house them properly, and to eventually work with museums and collectors to ensure the collection's preservation. Watching those precious bottles leave my house should have been heartbreaking, but instead I felt a profound sense of relief. They were going to someone who would treasure them the way they deserve to be treasured. Someone who understood that true value isn't measured only in dollars, but in artistry, history, and the passion of the people who created and preserved these beautiful things. Sophia returned from her winter break without even noticing that anything had changed in the basement vault. She was too busy preparing for spring semester and planning her summer internship to pay attention to anything happening in my world. Her indifference was so complete that I could have sold every piece in the collection, and she wouldn't have noticed unless I told her directly. As spring arrived and my 73rd birthday approached, I found myself thinking more and more about legacy and what we leave behind when we die. I'd always assumed that my legacy would be tied to Sophia, that I would live on through the values and appreciation I'd instilled in her. But clearly that wasn't going to happen. Instead, my legacy would be the collection itself, preserved and treasured by someone who understood its significance. That seemed like a more fitting monument to my life's work than forcing it on someone who would never appreciate what I'd built. The final confirmation of my decision came during Sophia's spring break visit. She arrived home with news that she'd decided to change her major from liberal arts to business, with a focus on social media marketing. When I asked her what had inspired this change, she explained that she wanted to become an influencer and needed to understand the business side of building a personal brand. "There's so much money in social media, Grandmama," she said excitedly. "If you can get enough followers, companies will pay you just to post pictures of their products. Tyler's cousin makes like $50,000 a year just posting about makeup and clothes." This was her ambition. This was what excited her about her future. Not creating anything meaningful or beautiful, not contributing something valuable to the world, but getting paid to convince people to buy products they probably didn't need. What about art, Sophia? What about culture and history and the things that make life meaningful? She looked at me with the patient expression she used when she thought I was being particularly naive. "Grandmama, that stuff is fine for museums and whatever, but it's not practical. I need to think about making money and building a career. I can't live in the past like you do." Living in the past. That's how she saw my appreciation for beauty and craftsmanship and history. Not as an understanding of what makes life rich and meaningful, but as an inability to embrace the shallow, commercial world she found so exciting. I looked at this young woman I'd raised and loved, and I realized that we had become strangers. We shared no common values, no similar interests, no real connection beyond the accident of genetics that had made me responsible for her care after her mother died. The relationship I'd treasured and fought to preserve was entirely one-sided. That evening, as I sat alone in my library after Sophia had left to meet friends, I felt a profound sense of peace about my decision. My perfume collection would go to Miranda, who would ensure its proper care and preservation. The house and a generous trust fund would provide Sophia with financial security, which was clearly all she really wanted from me anyway. And someday, when my will was read and Sophia learned what she'd lost through her years of indifference and dismissiveness, maybe she would finally understand that actions have consequences. That the way we treat people, especially people who love us, matters more than social media followers or brand partnerships or any of the shallow things she'd chosen to value instead of our relationship. Maybe she would remember the grandmother who'd tried to share her passion for beautiful things with her, and she would understand what she'd thrown away. Or maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she would just see it as further evidence that I was weird and old-fashioned and out of touch with modern reality. Either way, I was finally free from the burden of trying to force someone to love and appreciate things they were determined to dismiss. My collection would be preserved by someone who understood its value, and that was the only legacy that truly mattered. As I climbed the stairs to my bedroom that night, I caught the scent of Ambre Mystique lingering in the hallway where I'd applied it that morning. It was a beautiful, complex fragrance with notes of amber and vanilla and rare flowers that had been extinct for decades. To someone with an educated nose, it was clearly a masterpiece of perfumery artistry. But to Sophia, it would always smell like mothballs. And that difference, more than anything else, explained everything about why my collection would soon belong to someone who could truly appreciate its beauty. The morning after Sophia left for her second year at Princeton, I discovered something that changed everything. I was doing my usual walkthrough of the house, checking that she hadn't left any damage behind from her brief visit, when I noticed that my jewelry box in the master bedroom had been moved. It was subtle, the kind of thing most people wouldn't notice, but I'd placed it in a very specific position on my vanity, and now it sat at a slightly different angle. My hands trembled as I opened the antique mahogany box that had belonged to my grandmother. The top tray looked normal at first glance, but as I lifted it to check the lower compartments, my heart stopped. The diamond tennis bracelet Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary was gone. So was my mother's pearl necklace, the one she'd worn on her wedding day in 1952. I sat heavily on my vanity bench, staring at the empty spaces where these precious pieces should have been. Each missing item represented not just monetary value, but irreplaceable family history. The tennis bracelet had been Robert's way of celebrating the milestone of 2 decades together, presented to me over champagne at our favorite restaurant. My mother's pearls carried the weight of 3 generations, passed down through women who had treasured them as symbols of love and commitment. But someone had seen them merely as objects to be taken and presumably sold. Someone who'd had access to my most private spaces, my most personal belongings, someone I'd trusted completely. I searched the rest of my jewelry collection methodically, my dread growing with each discovery. A pair of vintage Cartier earrings, gone. My grandmother's Art Deco emerald ring, missing. In total, 7 pieces had vanished, all of them valuable enough to be worth stealing, but small enough to be easily concealed and transported. The theft had been calculated and deliberate. This wasn't a random break-in or a crime of opportunity. Someone had specifically targeted pieces that would be worth significant money but might not be immediately missed. Someone who knew my routines, knew when I'd be away from the house, knew exactly where I kept my most valuable possessions. Someone who had been planning this for some time. I called Detective Patricia Moreau at the Boston Police Department, a woman I'd met through charity work who specialized in high-value theft cases. She arrived within 2 hours, professional and thorough in her examination of the scene. "Mrs. Beaumont," she said after completing her initial investigation, "there's no sign of forced entry anywhere in the house. No broken windows, no damaged locks, no indication that anyone broke in from outside. Whoever took these items either had a key or was let in by someone with access." The implication hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud. The only people with keys to my house were myself, my housekeeper Elena, who'd been with me for 15 years and was above suspicion, and Sophia. "I need to ask some difficult questions," Detective Moreau continued gently. "Has anyone else been in the house recently? Any workers, visitors, or house guests who might have had access to your bedroom?" I thought about Sophia's recent visit, about Tyler's presence in my home, about the casual way they'd both treated my possessions and my privacy. "My granddaughter was here last week with her boyfriend. They stayed for 3 days. And during that time, did either of them have unsupervised access to your bedroom?" The answer was yes, of course. I'd given them complete freedom to move through the house, had trusted them to respect my belongings and my space. The idea of posting restrictions or hiding my jewelry from my own granddaughter had never occurred to me. "Yes," I said quietly. "They both had access to the entire house." Detective Moreau made careful notes, her expression professionally neutral but sympathetic. "I'll need to get detailed descriptions and photographs of the missing items, if you have them, and I'll need contact information for both your granddaughter and her boyfriend." The process of documenting the theft took 3 hours. I provided photographs of myself wearing the stolen pieces, insurance appraisals, and detailed descriptions of each missing item. The total value came to nearly $200,000, a sum that made even Detective Moreau raise her eyebrows. "Mrs. Beaumont, theft of this magnitude is a serious felony. If we can identify the perpetrator and recover the items, we're looking at significant criminal charges." After the detective left, I sat alone in my house feeling violated in a way I'd never experienced before. It wasn't just about the monetary value of what had been taken, though that was substantial. It was the betrayal of trust, the violation of the most intimate spaces of my life, the realization that someone I loved had seen my treasures as nothing more than objects to be stolen and sold. But I still couldn't bring myself to believe that Sophia had actually taken the jewelry herself. Despite her dismissive attitude and her lack of appreciation for beautiful things, I couldn't imagine her literally stealing from me. It seemed more likely that Tyler had taken the pieces, either with or without her knowledge. I decided to give Sophia the benefit of the doubt and called her directly. "Hi, Grandmama," she answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright and casual. "What's up?" "Sophia, I need to ask you something important. During your visit last week, did you notice anything unusual in my bedroom? Anyone going through my things or showing interest in my jewelry?" There was a pause that lasted just a fraction too long. "No, why? Did something happen?" "Some of my jewelry is missing. Valuable pieces that were taken from my bedroom." Another pause. Longer this time. When Sophia spoke again, her voice had changed subtly. "That's terrible, Grandmama. Have you called the police?" It must have been a break-in or something. There was no break-in, Sophia. Whoever took these items had access to the house. Well, maybe Elena took them? I mean, she has been working for you for a long time. Maybe she finally decided to help herself to some of your stuff. The suggestion that Elena, who'd been nothing but loyal and trustworthy for 15 years, might be responsible for this theft, told me everything I needed to know about Sophia's character. She was immediately willing to throw an innocent person under suspicion to deflect attention from herself and Tyler. Elena didn't take my jewelry, Sophia. I need to know if Tyler might have had access to my bedroom while you were here. Tyler? Sophia's voice rose with manufactured indignation. Are you seriously accusing my boyfriend of stealing from you? That's incredibly insulting, Grandmama. Tyler would never do something like that. But even as she defended him, I could hear something false in her tone. A performance of outrage rather than genuine shock at the suggestion. Sophia, I'm not accusing anyone. I'm trying to understand how valuable jewelry disappeared from my bedroom during the only time anyone outside the household has had access to it. I can't believe you're doing this, Sophia said, her voice becoming tearful now. My grandmother is basically calling me and my boyfriend thieves. This is so hurtful. The conversation devolved from there, with Sophia becoming increasingly emotional and defensive while providing no actual information that might help recover the missing items. She insisted that neither she nor Tyler had seen anything unusual, had noticed any missing jewelry, or had any idea how the theft might have occurred. By the end of the call, I was more convinced than ever that Tyler had taken my jewelry, and that Sophia either knew about it or strongly suspected it but was protecting him anyway. 3 days later, Detective Moreau called with an update. Mrs. Beaumont, we've been investigating local pawn shops and jewelry dealers who might have been approached with high-end pieces matching your descriptions. We found something interesting. My pulse quickened. What did you find? A pawn shop in Cambridge reported that a young man tried to sell them a diamond tennis bracelet matching your description yesterday. The owner became suspicious because the piece was obviously expensive, and the seller seemed nervous and unfamiliar with its value. The shop owner took photographs of both the bracelet and the seller's identification before declining the transaction. Did they get the seller's name? Tyler Morrison. Age 21. The address on his ID matches your granddaughter's boyfriend. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd been expecting it. Tyler had stolen from me, and Sophia had to have known. There was no way he could have accessed my bedroom and taken my jewelry without her knowledge or assistance. What happens next? I asked. We have enough evidence to arrest Mr. Morrison for felony theft. The pawn shop owner is willing to testify, and we have the photographs he took. But I need to warn you, Mrs. Beaumont, that this will likely implicate your granddaughter as well. If she provided access to your bedroom or helped plan the theft, she could be facing charges as an accomplice. I felt sick. Despite everything, despite her selfishness and dismissiveness and lack of appreciation for anything I valued, I'd never imagined that Sophia would actually participate in stealing from me. Before we proceed with the arrest, Detective Moreau continued, you might want to consider confronting them directly. Sometimes in family situations like this, people are willing to return stolen property and make amends without going through the criminal justice system. I thought about this suggestion for nearly an hour after ending the call. Part of me wanted Tyler arrested immediately, wanted him to face the full consequences of violating my home and stealing my treasures. But another part of me hoped that Sophia might still have enough decency left to do the right thing if given the chance. Finally, I decided to drive to Princeton and confront them both in person. The drive to New Jersey gave me 2 hours to think about everything that had led to this moment. I remembered 7-year-old Sophia crying in my arms after her mother's funeral, promising me that she would always be good, always make me proud. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike in the driveway, celebrating her first successful performance in a school play, helping her with algebra homework at my kitchen table. When had that sweet, loving child become someone capable of stealing from the woman who'd raised her? When had I lost her so completely? I found them at Tyler's off-campus apartment, a shabby place that smelled of stale beer and unwashed laundry. Sophia answered the door, and her face went pale when she saw me standing there. Grandmama, what are you doing here? I need to speak with you and Tyler. May I come in? Sophia's eyes darted nervously toward the interior of the apartment. This isn't really a good time. Tyler's not feeling well, and the place is kind of a mess. I'm not here about housekeeping, Sophia. I'm here about my stolen jewelry. Tyler appeared behind her then, wearing a Princeton t-shirt that probably cost more than Elena made in a week. His expression was wary but not particularly surprised to see me. Mrs. Beaumont, he said with forced casualness. Sophia told me about your jewelry going missing. That's really terrible. Yes, it is terrible, I agreed, pushing past them into the apartment. Especially since I know you're the one who took it. The silence that followed was deafening. I watched as Tyler and Sophia exchanged glances, some kind of silent communication passing between them. Finally, Tyler attempted to bluster his way through. I have no idea what you're talking about. Are you seriously coming here to accuse me of stealing from you? That's insane. Tyler, the police have photographs of you trying to pawn my tennis bracelet 3 days ago. They have your ID, your photograph, and the testimony of the shop owner who refused to buy it from you. Tyler's face crumbled, all his false bravado disappearing in an instant. He sank onto his couch, putting his head in his hands. Oh God, he whispered. I'm so screwed. I turned to look at Sophia, who was standing frozen by the door, tears streaming down her face. Did you know? I asked her quietly. She couldn't meet my eyes. Grandmama, I can explain. Did you know? I repeated, my voice sharper now. I found out after, she whispered. Tyler needed money for his student loans, and he saw all that jewelry just sitting there in your bedroom. He said you had so much that you'd never miss a few pieces. So you did know. You knew he'd stolen from me, and you said nothing. You let me go through the agony of discovering the theft, reporting it to the police, suspecting my housekeeper, all while knowing exactly what had happened. Sophia finally looked at me, her eyes red and desperate. I was going to tell him to return everything. I was going to make him put it all back. When? It's been a week, Sophia. A week during which I've been tortured by the violation of my home and the betrayal of my trust. A week during which you let me suffer while protecting the person who stole from me. Tyler looked up from the couch. Mrs. Beaumont, I'm really sorry. I know it was wrong. I was just desperate, and I thought you wouldn't really miss them. You have so much stuff. So much stuff. Just like Sophia had described my perfume collection. To both of them, everything I'd treasured and collected over a lifetime was just stuff. Objects without meaning or significance that existed primarily for their potential utility to other people. Where are the rest of the pieces? I asked coldly. Tyler gestured toward his bedroom. They're in there. I only tried to sell the one bracelet. Everything else is still here. I followed him into the bedroom, Sophia trailing behind us like a guilty shadow. Tyler opened his top dresser drawer and pulled out a small cloth bag. Inside were the rest of my stolen treasures, jumbled together carelessly like costume jewelry from a yard sale. Seeing my mother's pearls tangled up with my grandmother's emerald ring, seeing Tyler handle these precious heirlooms like worthless trinkets, filled me with a rage unlike anything I'd ever experienced. These weren't just valuable objects to me. They were connections to the people I'd loved and lost, physical embodiments of family history and cherished memories. How dare you, I said, my voice trembling with fury. How dare you put your hands on things that have been in my family for generations? How dare you reduce my treasures to nothing more than a quick source of cash for your student loans? Tyler had the grace to look ashamed. I know it was wrong, Mrs. Beaumont. I'm really sorry. You're sorry you got caught. If that pawn shop owner hadn't been suspicious, you would have sold my bracelet and eventually all the rest of these pieces, and I never would have seen them again. I turned to face Sophia. And you? You would have let him do it. You would have watched him sell off pieces of your family's history to pay his bills, and you would have said nothing. I was going to stop him, Sophia insisted weakly. When? After he'd sold everything? After there was nothing left to recover? Neither of them had an answer for that. I carefully gathered my jewelry from Tyler's dresser, handling each piece with the reverence it deserved, while they watched in uncomfortable silence. The police know who took these. I told Tyler as I secured everything in my purse. They have evidence. They're prepared to arrest you for felony theft. Tyler went white. Mrs. Beaumont, please, I can't go to jail. It would ruin my entire future. I'll pay you back for everything, I swear. I'll get a job. I'll work extra hours, whatever it takes. Pay me back, Tyler? These pieces are irreplaceable. My mother's pearls can't be replaced. My grandmother's ring can't be replaced. You can't pay me back for family heirlooms that have been treasured for 3 generations. Sophia finally found her voice. Grandmama, please don't press charges. I know what Tyler did was wrong, but he's learned his lesson. He'll never do anything like this again. How do you know that, Sophia? How do you know he won't steal from the next wealthy family he encounters? How do you know this isn't a pattern of behavior that will continue until someone stops him? But even as I said these words, I realized I was more hurt by Sophia's betrayal than by Tyler's theft. Tyler was essentially a stranger to me, someone whose character I'd never really known or trusted. But Sophia was my granddaughter, the child I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for. Her willingness to protect Tyler at my expense, to let me suffer while she covered up his crimes, was a betrayal that cut deeper than any theft ever could. I want all of you to stay away from my house, I said finally. Both of you. You're not welcome in my home anymore. Grandmama, you can't mean that, Sophia said, fresh tears starting to flow. I'm your granddaughter. You can't just cut me out of your life over this. You cut yourself out of my life when you chose to protect someone who stole from me instead of telling me the truth. You made your choice, Sophia. Tyler's convenience was more important to you than my well-being or my trust. I left them standing in that squalid apartment, both of them crying and pleading for forgiveness they hadn't earned and didn't deserve. The drive back to Boston was one of the longest and most painful of my life. That evening, I called Detective Moreau and told her I'd recovered the stolen jewelry, but that I wanted to proceed with pressing charges against Tyler anyway. She seemed surprised by my decision. Mrs. Beaumont, many families in situations like this prefer to handle things privately once the property is returned. Detective, this young man violated my home and stole irreplaceable family heirlooms. The fact that I was able to recover them doesn't change the seriousness of his crime. If I don't press charges, what's to stop him from doing this to someone else? What's to stop him from thinking that wealthy elderly people are easy targets for this kind of theft? And what about your granddaughter? Our investigation suggests she may have been aware of the theft after it occurred and chose not to report it. That could be considered accessory after the fact. I was quiet for a long moment, weighing my options. Part of me wanted Sophia to face legal consequences for her role in this betrayal. But she was still my granddaughter, still the little girl I'd raised after her mother died. Focus on Tyler, I said, finally. I'll handle Sophia separately. Tyler Morrison was arrested 2 days later on charges of felony theft, breaking and entering, and criminal trespass. Because the total value of the stolen items exceeded $50,000, he was facing up to 10 years in prison if convicted. Sophia called me crying hysterically after his arrest, begging me to drop the charges and claiming that I was ruining Tyler's life over a misunderstanding. When I refused to back down, she became angry. "This is all about your stupid jewelry collection," she screamed into the phone. "You care more about your things than you do about people. You're willing to destroy Tyler's future just because he touched some of your precious objects." Sophia, he didn't just touch them, he stole them. He planned to sell them for cash, and you knew about it and said nothing. I was protecting someone I love. She shot back. Something you apparently wouldn't understand since you've never cared about anyone as much as you care about your collections. The accusation stung because it was so unfair. I'd spent the last 10 years of my life caring about her more than anything else, sacrificing my own interests and desires to provide her with love and stability. But apparently all of that was invisible to her now. "I've spent the last 10 years putting you first in everything," I said quietly. "I reorganized my entire life around your needs after your mother died. I gave you everything I could give you. And this is how you repay me." You gave me things, Sophia said bitterly. Money for school, a nice house to live in, expensive clothes and trips. But you never really understood me or cared about what I actually wanted. What did you want, Sophia? What did I fail to give you? I wanted a grandmother who didn't judge me all the time. I wanted someone who didn't constantly try to turn me into someone I'm not. I wanted you to accept me for who I am instead of always being disappointed that I'm not more interested in your weird hobbies and old stuff. Her words revealed the fundamental disconnect between us more clearly than anything else she could have said. She saw my attempts to share my interests with her as judgment and criticism. She interpreted my efforts to cultivate her appreciation for beauty and craftsmanship as rejection of who she was naturally. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had been trying to turn her into someone she wasn't. But I'd been trying to turn her into someone better. Someone with depth and appreciation for the things that make life meaningful. I'd been trying to save her from the shallow existence she seemed determined to embrace. You're right, I said finally. I did want you to be someone different than who you are. I wanted you to be someone capable of appreciating beauty and meaning and history. Someone who could see beyond immediate pleasures and social media popularity to the things that actually matter in life. And because I'm not that person, you're willing to send Tyler to prison. I'm pressing charges against Tyler because he's a thief who violated my home and stole my treasures. Your relationship with him doesn't change the fact that what he did was a serious crime. That was the last time Sophia and I spoke before Tyler's trial 6 months later. She refused to answer my calls or respond to my letters, apparently convinced that I was the villain in this situation rather than the victim of theft and betrayal. The trial itself was brief and straightforward. The evidence against Tyler was overwhelming, and his court-appointed attorney advised him to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. He was convicted of felony theft and sentenced to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. Sophia was in the courtroom when the sentence was handed down, sitting in the back row and glaring at me with undisguised hatred. When Tyler was led away in handcuffs, she rushed out of the courtroom without acknowledging me at all. I went home that night feeling no satisfaction from seeing justice done. Tyler's conviction and imprisonment wouldn't undo the betrayal I'd experienced, or repair the relationship with my granddaughter that had been damaged beyond repair. But it did confirm something I'd been slowly realizing over the past year. Sophia and I were fundamentally incompatible people who happened to be related by blood and circumstance. We shared no common values, no similar interests, no real understanding of what mattered in life. The relationship I'd treasured and fought to preserve had been largely one-sided, sustained by my love and hope rather than any genuine connection between us. 3 weeks after Tyler's sentencing, I received a letter from Sophia. It was brief and bitter, accusing me of caring more about money and possessions than about family relationships. She announced that she was transferring to a college in California to be closer to Tyler's family, who had apparently welcomed her with the warmth and understanding she felt I'd never provided. The letter ended with a declaration that she never wanted to see or speak to me again, and that she hoped my precious jewelry and perfume collections would keep me company in my old age, since I'd chosen them over her. Reading those words should have broken my heart, but instead they brought me a strange sense of relief. For the first time in months, I knew exactly where I stood with Sophia. There would be no more hoping for reconciliation, no more wondering if she might eventually mature enough to appreciate what I'd tried to give her. She had made her choice, and it was final. That evening, I called Theodore Ashworth and made one final change to my will. Originally, I'd planned to leave Sophia the house and a substantial trust fund, even while giving the perfume collection to Miranda. But after everything that had happened, I realized that Sophia didn't deserve even that level of generosity from me. The house would still go to her, because it had been her childhood home and because I couldn't bear the thought of strangers living in the space where Robert and I had been so happy. But the trust fund would be dramatically reduced, providing her with enough money for basic security, but nothing approaching the lavish inheritance she'd probably been expecting. The majority of my liquid assets would go to charity, specifically to organizations that preserved and promoted appreciation for art, culture, and beauty. If Sophia didn't value these things, then I would ensure that my money went to people who did. 3 months later, I had my second heart attack. This one was more serious than the first, requiring emergency surgery and a week-long stay in the hospital. During my recovery, I had plenty of time to think about mortality and legacy, and what would remain of me after I was gone. Sophia never called to check on my condition, never sent flowers or a card, never acknowledged my brush with death in any way. The only family member who visited me in the hospital was Miranda, who flew in from California as soon as she heard about my illness. "Rose," she said, sitting beside my bed and holding my hand, "I'm so sorry about everything that's happened with Sophia. I know how much you love her." "I did love her," I corrected gently. "But love isn't always enough, is it? Sometimes people grow into someone you can't recognize anymore." Miranda squeezed my hand. "Her loss. She has no idea what an amazing woman raised her." As I recovered from my surgery, I found myself thinking less and less about Sophia and more about the positive relationships in my life. Miranda, who called regularly and visited whenever she could. Elena, who had been with me through thick and thin and who genuinely cared about my well-being. Detective Moreau, who had become something of a friend after handling my case with such professionalism and compassion. I also thought about my perfume collection, now safely distributed between my vault and Miranda's gallery in California. Each bottle represented not just monetary value but years of research, passion, and dedication to preserving something beautiful for future generations. That felt like a worthy legacy, something that would outlast whatever pain and disappointment I'd experienced in my personal relationships. 6 months after my heart attack, I was strong enough to travel to California to see how Miranda had displayed the portions of my collection that I'd given to her. She had created a small museum-quality exhibition in her gallery, with proper lighting and climate control and informative placards explaining the history and significance of each piece. "This is perfect," I told her, as we walked through the display together. "This is exactly how these treasures should be preserved and shared." "I've had inquiries from several museums about purchasing some of the pieces," Miranda said, "but I want to make sure I'm honoring your wishes about how they should be handled." "Sell to museums if they'll display them properly," I said without hesitation. "These pieces deserve to be seen and appreciated, not hidden away in private collections." Standing in that gallery surrounded by bottles that I'd spent decades acquiring and researching, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment and peace. This was what mattered. This was what would last long after I was gone. Not the pain of family betrayal or the disappointment of relationships that hadn't lived up to my hopes, but the beauty I'd preserved and the passion I'd shared with people who could appreciate it. That night, I called Theodore one last time to make absolutely certain that my will reflected my true wishes. Miranda would inherit the perfume collection with instructions to continue preserving and sharing it appropriately. Sophia would inherit the house and a modest trust fund, enough to provide security but not luxury. And the bulk of my estate would go to museums and cultural institutions that would use it to preserve beauty for future generations. It wasn't the legacy I'd originally planned, but it was the legacy I'd earned, through my choices and the choices of the people around me. And for the first time in years, I was completely at peace with that outcome. 2 years after Tyler's conviction, I received an unexpected phone call that would change everything I thought I knew about my granddaughter's character. The caller identified herself as Dr. Amanda Chen, a psychiatrist at Massachusetts General Hospital, and she was calling about Sophia. "Mrs. Beaumont, your granddaughter has been admitted to our psychiatric unit following a suicide attempt. She's listed you as her emergency contact, and we need to discuss her treatment options." The words hit me like a physical blow. Despite everything that had happened between us, despite her cruel words and betrayal, the thought of Sophia trying to harm herself filled me with terror. Whatever anger I'd been carrying dissolved instantly, replaced by the maternal protectiveness that had defined our relationship for so many years. "Is she all right? Can I see her?" "She's stable now, but she's been struggling with severe depression and substance abuse issues. She specifically asked to speak with you, Mrs. Beaumont. She says she has things she needs to tell you." I drove to the hospital in a state of emotional turmoil, unsure of what I would find when I saw Sophia again. It had been 2 years since our final argument. 2 years during which I'd heard nothing about her life or well-being. I'd assumed she was thriving in California. building a new life without the burden of her judgmental grandmother weighing her down. The young woman I found in that hospital room was barely recognizable as the confident, defiant girl who'd walked out of my life. Sophia looked gaunt and hollow-eyed, her once beautiful hair lank and unwashed, her skin bearing the telltale signs of someone who'd been neglecting basic self-care for months. "Grandmama," she whispered when she saw me, her voice breaking on the word. "You came." "Of course I came," I said, sitting carefully in the chair beside her bed. "You're my granddaughter. I'll always come when you need me." Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to find words. "I'm so sorry," she finally managed. "I'm sorry for everything. For Tyler, for the jewelry, for all the terrible things I said to you. I've been such a horrible person." "Sophia, what happened? How did you end up here?" She took a shuddering breath before answering. "Everything fell apart after Tyler went to prison. I thought his family would support me, would help me get through it. But they blamed me for not stopping you from pressing charges. They said I should have handled my own family better, should have been able to convince you not to send him to jail. The cruel irony of this wasn't lost on me. Tyler's family had expected Sophia to manipulate me into dropping charges against their son, essentially asking her to become complicit in protecting a thief at the expense of justice. So they abandoned you? Completely. They wouldn't return my calls, wouldn't let me visit Tyler in prison. I was suddenly alone in California with no family, no real friends, and a reputation as the girl whose grandmother sent her boyfriend to jail for stealing jewelry. I felt a pang of guilt at this revelation, even though I knew I'd made the right decision in pressing charges. I hadn't considered how Tyler's conviction might affect Sophia's social standing or her ability to build relationships in her new environment. "The worst part was," Sophia continued, "I started to understand that you'd been right about everything. About Tyler. About the kind of person he really was. About the people I was choosing to surround myself with. But by then, it was too late to apologize. Too late to take back all the horrible things I'd said to you." She described the downward spiral that had consumed her life over the past 2 years. Academic probation, due to poor grades and excessive absences. A series of increasingly toxic relationships with young men who reminded her of Tyler. Experimenting with drugs and alcohol as a way to numb the guilt and loneliness that had become her constant companions. "I kept thinking about that night when you showed Jessica your perfume collection," she said, her voice barely audible. "The way her face lit up when she saw all those beautiful bottles, the way you talked about the history and artistry behind each piece. And I realized that I'd never once asked you to show me that collection. I'd lived in that house for 10 years, and I'd never once shown genuine interest in the thing you cared about most." This admission broke something open in my chest. All those years, I'd been waiting for Sophia to ask questions about my collection, to show curiosity about my passion. I'd taken her lack of interest as a rejection of me personally, but maybe it had been something else. Maybe she'd been intimidated by my expertise, afraid of revealing her ignorance about something I clearly valued so highly. "I was scared," she continued, as if reading my thoughts. "Scared that if I asked questions, you'd realize how shallow I really was. How little I knew about art, or culture, or anything meaningful. It seemed easier to pretend I didn't care than to risk disappointing you by not understanding. Sophia, you could never have disappointed me by asking questions. That's how we learn, how we grow. I would have been thrilled to teach you about perfume or art or anything else you wanted to know. I know that now. But back then, I felt like I was already such a disappointment to you, like I wasn't smart enough, or sophisticated enough, or interested in the right things. So I decided to embrace being the shallow granddaughter instead of trying to be someone I didn't think I could become." The conversation continued for 3 hours, with Sophia revealing layer after layer of regret and self-recrimination. She told me about the moment she'd realized that Tyler was actually planning to sell all my stolen jewelry, not just the one bracelet. She'd found him researching the values of antique jewelry online, making lists of potential buyers, treating my family treasures like a business opportunity. I confronted him about it, she said. Told him he had to return everything immediately. That's when he showed me his true colors. He said I was being naive, that you had so much money and jewelry that losing a few pieces wouldn't matter to you at all. He said we deserved that money more than you did because we were young and had our whole lives ahead of us. What did you say to that? Nothing. That's the part I'm most ashamed of, Grandmama. I said nothing. I was so afraid of losing him, so desperate to keep him happy, that I let him convince me that stealing from you was somehow justified. I became complicit in something I knew was wrong because I was too weak to stand up for what was right. Hearing this confirmation of Tyler's manipulative nature vindicated my decision to press charges, but it also helped me understand how Sophia had been drawn into the situation. She hadn't been motivated by greed or malice, but by fear and insecurity, and a desperate need to maintain a relationship with someone who was using her vulnerability against her. After you pressed charges and Tyler was arrested, Sophia continued, I finally started to see him clearly. The way he blamed everyone but himself for the consequences of his actions. The way he expected me to somehow fix the situation he'd created. The way he made me feel guilty for not being able to convince you to drop the charges. She described visiting him in jail, watching him rage about the unfairness of his situation, while showing no genuine remorse for what he'd done to me or to her. He demanded that she find ways to raise money for a better lawyer, suggested she ask me for help, even proposed that she steal more items from my house to fund his legal defense. That's when I knew I had to cut all contact with him, she said. But by then the damage was done. His family hated me, my college friends thought I was drama, and I'd burned the most important relationship in my life because I chose loyalty to him over loyalty to you. The guilt and shame had consumed her, leading to increasingly self-destructive behavior. She'd dropped out of school, moved into a series of shabby apartments, worked a string of dead-end jobs that barely paid her bills. She'd been trying to punish herself for the choices she'd made, but the punishment had spiraled into something dangerous and potentially fatal. The night I took those pills, she said, referring to her suicide attempt, I wasn't really trying to die. I was just trying to make the guilt stop. Make the constant replaying of our last conversation stop. Make the regret about losing you stop. Sophia, you didn't lose me. I'm here now, aren't I? But I did lose you. I lost the relationship we had, the trust we shared, the love that used to define everything between us. I threw it all away for someone who never deserved it, someone who was using me from the beginning. Looking at this broken young woman who'd nearly destroyed herself with guilt and regret, I felt my anger dissolving completely. Yes, Sophia had made terrible choices. Yes, she'd betrayed my trust and said unforgivable things during our final argument. But she'd been manipulated by someone older and more experienced in deception, someone who'd exploited her insecurities and her fear of abandonment. What do you want now, Sophia? What do you need from me? I want to make amends. I want to find a way to earn back some small portion of your trust, even if I can never have the relationship we used to have. I want to become someone worthy of the love you gave me for all those years. Dr. Chen joined us then for a family meeting to discuss Sophia's treatment plan. She would need intensive therapy to address her depression and substance abuse issues, followed by a structured program to help her rebuild her life and develop healthier coping mechanisms. Mrs. Beaumont, Dr. Chen said, Sophia's recovery will depend heavily on having a strong support system. She's expressed a desire to repair her relationship with you, and frankly, that might be crucial to her emotional healing. I looked at Sophia, seeing not the defiant young woman who'd walked out of my life 2 years earlier, but the frightened little girl who'd clung to me after her mother's funeral. Whatever mistakes she'd made, whatever pain she'd caused, she was still the child I'd raised and loved. What would that support look like? I asked. Initially, regular visits during her inpatient treatment. Eventually, perhaps helping her transition back to independent living when she's ready. The key is rebuilding trust slowly and setting clear boundaries about acceptable behavior. Over the following weeks, I visited Sophia in the hospital regularly, participating in family therapy sessions and gradually rebuilding our connection. It wasn't easy. There were moments when old anger flared, when I remembered the pain of her betrayal and wanted to protect myself from being hurt again. But there were also moments of genuine connection, glimpses of the thoughtful, caring person Sophia could become when she wasn't consumed by fear and insecurity. She began asking questions about my life, showing real interest in my experiences and feelings for the first time in years. "Tell me about your perfume collection," she said during one visit. "I mean, really tell me. Not just which bottles are valuable, but why you started collecting them. What it means to you." I spent an hour describing how I discovered my first vintage perfume at an estate sale shortly after Robert's death, how the complex scent had transported me to another time and place, how that experience had awakened my interest in the artistry and history of fragrance. Sophia listened with focused attention, asking thoughtful questions and making connections I wouldn't have expected. "So it's not just about having beautiful objects," she said finally. "It's about preserving stories. Each bottle contains not just a scent, but the memories and intentions of the person who created it and the people who wore it." Exactly. Every perfume tells a story about the era when it was created, the master perfumer who blended it, the women who chose to make it part of their identity. When I wear a vintage fragrance, I'm connecting with all of that history. And when I said you smelled like mothballs that night at the restaurant, I was dismissing not just your choice of fragrance, but everything it represented to you. The fact that she could make this connection, could understand the deeper meaning behind her casual cruelty, gave me hope that she might indeed be capable of growth and change. As Sophia's treatment progressed, she began working with a therapist to understand the patterns of behavior that had led to her downfall. She learned to recognize how her fear of abandonment had made her vulnerable to manipulation, how her need for approval had caused her to compromise her values, how her shame about her perceived inadequacies had prevented her from pursuing genuine interests and connections. "I think I was jealous," she admitted during one of our conversations. "Jealous of how passionate you were about your collections, how much you knew about art and history and culture. Instead of trying to learn from you, I convinced myself that those things didn't matter, that people who cared about them were just being pretentious. It's never too late to develop those interests, Sophia. You're 21 years old. You have decades to explore and learn and grow. Do you think you could teach me? About perfume, I mean. I know I don't deserve it after everything I've done, but I'd like to understand what I dismissed for so long." The request moved me deeply, representing as it did everything I'd hoped for during all those years when Sophia seemed completely uninterested in my passion. But I also felt cautious about moving too quickly, about setting expectations that might lead to disappointment for both of us. "We can start slowly," I said. "When you're ready to leave the hospital, when you're stronger, maybe you'd like to visit my collection. Not as an inheritance or an obligation, but just as a way of connecting with something I love." 3 months later, Sophia was discharged from the hospital into a transitional living program that would help her develop independent living skills while maintaining therapeutic support. She'd been sober for 4 months, was taking medication for her depression, and had begun making concrete plans for rebuilding her life. The first time she came to visit me at home after her discharge, I was nervous about how she would react to being back in the house where so much of our conflict had played out. But she moved through the familiar rooms with a kind of reverent attention I'd never seen from her before. "Everything is so beautiful," she said, stopping to examine a painting she must have walked past thousands of times during her childhood. "I never really looked at any of it before. I just saw it as furniture and decorations, not as things you'd chosen because they meant something to you." When I offered to show her the perfume collection, she accepted with an enthusiasm that was both genuine and slightly nervous. We descended into the climate-controlled vault together, and I watched her face as she took in the magnitude of what I'd assembled over 4 decades. "Oh my God," she whispered, much as Jessica had done years earlier. "There are so many of them, and they're all so different, so beautiful." I began with the basics, explaining how perfumes are constructed, the difference between top notes and base notes, the various families of scents and how they relate to each other. Sophia listened intently, asking questions that showed she was genuinely trying to understand rather than just going through the motions to please me. When I showed her a bottle of L'Heure Bleue from 1912, the same fragrance featured in the vintage poster that had captured Jessica's attention years earlier, Sophia's reaction was everything I'd hoped for. "This is over 100 years old," she said, holding the bottle with careful reverence. Someone wore this perfume during World War I, during the Jazz Age, through the Depression. It's like holding a piece of history. Would you like to smell it? She nodded, and I carefully applied a tiny amount to a testing strip. The complex, sophisticated scent filled the air between us, and watched Sophia's expression change as she experienced the artistry of Jacques Guerlain's masterpiece. "It's nothing like modern perfumes," she said. "It's so complex, so layered. I can smell flowers, but also something mysterious and deep. It tells a story." Exactly. This is what I was trying to share with you all those years. Not just pretty bottles or expensive scents, but artistry, and history, and craftsmanship. Each of these perfumes represents someone's life's work, someone's attempt to capture beauty and emotion in a bottle. We spent 3 hours in the vault that day, and when we finally emerged, Sophia was transformed. Not just by the experience of finally understanding my passion, but by the realization of how much she'd missed by dismissing it for so long. "I'm so sorry, Grandmama," she said as we sat in my library afterward. "I'm sorry I never asked you to share this with me before. I'm sorry I made fun of something so beautiful and meaningful. I'm sorry I was too proud and too scared to let you teach me." "You're learning now," I replied. "That's what matters." Over the following months, Sophia became a regular visitor to my house and my collection. She began reading books about perfume history, learning to identify different fragrance families, even experimenting with creating simple scent combinations under my guidance. Her enthusiasm was infectious, reminding me of my own early excitement when I'd first discovered the world of fine fragrance. But more than that, she was becoming someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with. The shallow, defensive young woman I'd known was being replaced by someone thoughtful and curious, someone capable of deep appreciation for beauty and craftsmanship. She was growing into the person I'd always hoped she could become. "I've been thinking about going back to school," she told me one afternoon as we worked together cataloging some recently acquired bottles. "Maybe studying art history or museum studies. I think I'd like to work in cultural preservation somehow." The idea filled me with pride and hope. Here was concrete evidence that Sophia was building a life based on meaningful values, rather than shallow pursuits. She was choosing to dedicate herself to something larger than her immediate pleasures or social status. "I think that's a wonderful idea," I said. "And if you're serious about it, I'd be happy to help with tuition and expenses." "I don't want you to think I'm only being nice to you now because I want money," she said quickly. "This isn't about inheritance or anything like that. I genuinely want to understand and appreciate the things you care about." "I know that, Sophia. The change in you is real and obvious. You're becoming someone who sees beauty and meaning, where you used to see only objects and obligations." A year later, Sophia was thriving in her museum studies program at Boston University. She'd maintained her sobriety, continued her therapy, and built a small circle of friends who shared her growing interest in art and culture. She was working part-time at a local gallery, gaining practical experience in the world she hoped to make her career. Most importantly, our relationship had been rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. She visited regularly, not out of obligation but because she enjoyed our conversations and our shared exploration of my collection. She brought friends to see the perfume vault, sharing her growing knowledge with the same enthusiasm I'd once shown her. "You know," she said during one of these visits, "I understand now why that comment about mothballs hurt you so much. I wasn't just criticizing your choice of fragrance. I was dismissing your expertise, your passion, everything you'd spent decades learning and collecting. You were a teenager, Sophia. Teenagers are supposed to be thoughtless and cruel sometimes. That's part of growing up. But I kept being thoughtless and cruel long after I should have known better. I chose to stay shallow instead of trying to grow. Chose to protect my ego instead of opening my heart to learning something new." The depth of her understanding and the sincerity of her regret convinced me that her transformation was genuine and lasting. This wasn't a performance designed to win back my favor, but a real evolution of character that had emerged from genuine self-reflection and hard work. It was around this time that I began reconsidering my will. The legal documents I'd had prepared 2 years earlier reflected my anger and disappointment with the person Sophia had been then. But the young woman sitting in my library now, discussing the historical significance of 1920s French perfumery with genuine passion and knowledge, was someone entirely different. "Sophia," I said during one of our conversations, "I need to tell you something about my will." She looked uncomfortable immediately. "Grandmama, you don't need to discuss that with me. I'm not expecting anything from you after everything I put you through." "That's exactly why I need to discuss it. When I was angry with you, when I felt betrayed and disappointed, I made changes to my will that reflected those feelings. I left most of my perfume collection to Miranda instead of to you." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. "I understand why you did that," she said finally. "Miranda appreciates beautiful things. She would have taken better care of your collection than I would have at that time. But you're not the same person you were then, are you?" "No, I'm not." "But, Grandmama, even if you never change your will, even if Miranda inherits your collection, I'm grateful for what you've already given me. You've taught me to see beauty, to understand history, to appreciate craftsmanship. You've helped me become someone I can be proud of. That's worth more than any inheritance." Her response convinced me that she was indeed worthy of reconsidering my estate plans. Someone who could value education and personal growth over material inheritance was someone who might be trusted with the responsibility of preserving my life's work. That week, I called Theodore and scheduled an appointment to revise my will once again. This time, the changes reflected hope rather than disappointment, love rather than anger. The perfume collection would be split between Miranda and Sophia, with Miranda receiving the museum-quality pieces that belonged in institutional settings, and Sophia inheriting the personal collection that could remain in family hands. The house would go to Sophia outright, along with a substantial trust fund that would allow her to pursue her career in cultural preservation without financial stress. But more importantly, I added detailed instructions about how the collection should be maintained, how individual pieces should be researched and documented, how the collection could be shared with other enthusiasts and scholars. If Sophia was going to inherit my life's work, she would do so with a clear understanding of the responsibilities that came with it. I also included a letter explaining why I'd changed my mind about her inheritance, describing the transformation I'd witnessed in her character and values over the past year. I wanted her to understand that the collection wasn't just a gift, but a recognition of her growth and a vote of confidence in her future. When I told Sophia about these changes, she cried. Not tears of joy at receiving a valuable inheritance, but tears of gratitude for being trusted with something so precious to me. "I promise I'll take care of it," she said. "I'll preserve it and study it and share it the way you would have wanted. I'll make sure it goes to people who understand its value, not people who just see expensive objects." Looking at her then, I knew I'd made the right decision. The shallow, materialistic young woman who'd dismissed my interests as weird hobbies had grown into someone capable of understanding and preserving genuine artistry and beauty. She'd earned the right to inherit not just my collection, but the responsibility of continuing the work I'd begun. That night, as I lay in bed thinking about everything that had led to this moment of reconciliation and renewal, I felt a profound sense of peace. Yes, we'd both made mistakes. Yes, there had been pain and betrayal and years of estrangement. But we'd also found our way back to each other, built something stronger and more meaningful than what we'd had before. Sophia hadn't just inherited my perfume collection. She'd inherited my passion for preservation, my commitment to beauty, my understanding that some things are worth more than money. She'd become the kind of person who would treasure and protect the legacy I'd spent 40 years building. And that transformation, more than any collection of rare bottles or valuable objects, was the real treasure I would leave behind when I was gone. 5 years have passed since that terrible night at the restaurant, when Sophia's careless words about mothballs changed the trajectory of both our lives. Today, as I watch her carefully arrange a display of rare Baccarat perfume bottles in the museum space she's created in the east wing of my house, I can hardly believe the transformation that has taken place. Sophia graduated summa cum laude from her museum studies program and spent 2 years working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. specializing in decorative arts and cultural preservation. She returned to Boston last year with a proposal that took my breath away, converting part of my house into a small private museum dedicated to the history of perfumery, with guided tours available by appointment for serious collectors and students. The lighting in this case isn't quite right for the Lalique bottles, she says now, adjusting the museum-quality fixtures she installed at her own expense. Her expertise has grown beyond anything I could have imagined during those early days when she was just learning to distinguish between eau de toilette and parfum concentrations. Trust your instincts, I tell her, settling into the comfortable chair she placed in the corner so I can observe her work. At 78, I've learned to delegate more and worry less, though watching Sophia handle these precious objects with such care and knowledge still fills me with profound satisfaction. The Beaumont collection, as she's named it, now attracts serious inquiries from perfume historians, museum curators, and master perfumers from around the world. Sophia has cataloged every piece with meticulous attention to provenance and historical context, creating a digital archive that scholars use for research. Several of her articles on the evolution of French perfumery have been published in prestigious journals. Mrs. Chen is coming tomorrow for the Guerlain consultation. Sophia reminds me, referring to Dr. Linda Chen, a fragrance chemist from MIT, who's been working to recreate some of the lost formulations in our collection. She's particularly interested in the 1889 Jicky sample we acquired last month. The Jicky she refers to cost us nearly $40,000 at auction, but Sophia convinced me it was worth the investment because of its historical significance as one of the first modern perfumes to use synthetic materials alongside natural ingredients. Her ability to balance the collection's financial and cultural value has proven far superior to my own somewhat impulsive collecting habits. Dr. Chen arrives the next morning with 2 graduate students in tow, all of them eager to examine our Guerlain archives. I watch from my chair as Sophia guides them through the collection, explaining the significance of each piece with the fluency of someone who's devoted years to understanding these treasures. The remarkable thing about this 1889 sample, she explains, carefully removing the tiny bottle from its climate-controlled case, is that it represents Jacques Guerlain's revolutionary decision to blend natural flower essences with synthetic vanillin. It was considered scandalous at the time, but it established the foundation for modern perfumery. Dr. Chen leans in to examine the bottle, her expression reverent. May we open it? I've been studying the original formulation notes from the Guerlain archives, and I believe we might be able to recreate this blend if we can analyze the remaining contents. Of course, Sophia says, producing the specialized tools she's learned to use for such examinations. Grandmama and I believe these treasures should serve research and education, not just collecting. Watching this interaction between 3 generations of women united by their passion for preserving beauty and knowledge, I feel a deep contentment that has nothing to do with monetary value or social status. This is legacy in its truest form, the passing down of knowledge, appreciation, and responsibility from one generation to the next. After Dr. Chen and her students leave, promising to share their analysis results with us within the month, Sophia and I sit in the garden, where I've had tea every afternoon for 20 years. The autumn light filters through the maple trees Robert planted when we first bought this house, creating the kind of golden atmosphere that makes everything seem touched by magic. I have something to tell you, Sophia says, and I notice she's fidgeting with her engagement ring, a simple but elegant piece that belonged to my mother. Her fiancé, David, is a curator at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, someone who shares her passion for art and understands the demands of working in cultural preservation. What is it, dear? David and I have been talking about children. About whether we want to start a family soon after we're married next year. The news fills me with joy, though I'm careful not to show too much enthusiasm. Sophia is 32 now, mature enough to make such decisions thoughtfully, but I don't want her to feel pressured by my hopes for great-grandchildren. And what have you decided? We both want children, she says, smiling at my careful neutrality. But more than that, we want to raise them with an appreciation for beauty and history and craftsmanship. We want them to grow up understanding that some things are worth preserving, worth studying, worth passing down to future generations. They'll be fortunate children to have parents who understand that, I say, meaning every word, I keep thinking about how different my life might have been if I'd learned those lessons earlier, Sophia continues. If I'd asked you to teach me about your collection when I was younger instead of dismissing it. If I'd recognized the value of what you were trying to share with me. You learned eventually, that's what matters. But I almost didn't. I almost destroyed the most important relationship in my life, because I was too proud and too frightened to admit I didn't understand something beautiful. We sit in comfortable silence for a while, both of us contemplating the journey that brought us to this peaceful afternoon. The pain of our estrangement feels distant now, like something that happened to different people in a different lifetime. There's something else, Sophia says eventually. The Smithsonian has made an offer for the complete Coty collection. They want to create a permanent exhibition on early 20th century American perfumery, and our pieces would be the centerpiece. This represents a significant decision for both of us. The Coty collection includes 47 bottles dating from 1904 to 1925, many of them unique pieces that would be impossible to replace. But they would also reach thousands of visitors at the Smithsonian, educating people about an art form that most consider frivolous or temporary. What do you think we should do? I ask, genuinely curious about her recommendation. I think we should sell them to the museum, she says without hesitation. These pieces deserve to be seen and studied by as many people as possible. Keeping them in our private collection serves our own pleasure, but selling them to the Smithsonian serves a larger purpose. Her answer confirms what I've known for months now. Sophia has truly understood the deepest lesson I've tried to teach her. Beautiful things aren't meant to be hoarded or hidden away. They're meant to be shared, studied, and preserved for future generations who might find meaning and inspiration in them. Then that's what we'll do, I agree. But on one condition. I want you to negotiate the sale and handle all the arrangements. This is your area of expertise now, not mine. That evening, as Sophia makes phone calls to arrange the Smithsonian transaction, I sit in my library thinking about the letter I wrote 5 years ago, explaining why I was leaving my collection to Miranda instead of to my granddaughter. That letter, along with the will that contained it, was destroyed long ago, replaced by documents that reflect the reality of who Sophia became, rather than who she was during our darkest period. The current will leaves the house and the collection to Sophia, along with detailed instructions for their preservation and eventual disposition. But more importantly, it includes a new letter, one that tells the story of transformation and redemption, of second chances and the power of genuine growth. The phone rings, interrupting my reverie. It's Miranda, calling from her gallery in California to check on my health and share news about the exhibition she's mounting, featuring some of the pieces I gave her years ago. Rose, you should see the crowds this exhibition is drawing, she says excitedly. People are fascinated by the history of these fragrances. Several collectors have already contacted me about purchasing pieces for their own museums. I'm so glad to hear that. You've done wonderful work preserving and sharing those pieces. How is Sophia doing with her museum project? I heard through the collector network that she's been doing some remarkable research on pre-war French perfumery. She's exceeded every expectation I ever had. I say honestly. She's become exactly the kind of person I always hoped she could be. After we hang up, I realize that both Miranda and Sophia are now carrying forward different aspects of my legacy. Miranda has the formal museum connections and the expertise to place pieces in major institutional collections. Sophia has the family connection and the intimate knowledge of my collection that comes from years of hands-on involvement. Together, they represent the best possible outcome for everything I've spent 40 years building. The collection will be preserved, studied, shared, and appreciated by people who understand its true value. A month later, I wake up feeling unusually tired and short of breath. Elena, my housekeeper, insists on calling my doctor despite my protests that I'm just having an off day. The examination reveals what I've been suspecting but haven't wanted to acknowledge. My heart is failing, and I likely have months rather than years left. The news doesn't frighten me as much as it might have once. I've lived a full life, loved deeply, and created something meaningful that will outlast my physical presence. Most importantly, I've seen Sophia grow into someone worthy of inheriting not just my possessions but my values and commitments. I tell Sophia about the diagnosis that evening, watching her face carefully for signs of the dramatic grief I remember from her mother's death. Instead, I see mature sadness mixed with gratitude for the time we've had together and determination to make the most of whatever time remains. "What do you need from me?" she asks simply. "I need you to continue what we've started here. The collection, the museum, the research projects. I need you to keep sharing these treasures with people who can appreciate them. Of course. But more than that, I want to document your knowledge while I still can. Your stories about how you acquired each piece, what drew you to particular perfumers or heiress, why certain bottles meant more to you than others. Over my remaining months, we spend hours each day doing exactly that. Sophia records my memories and insights about hundreds of individual pieces, creating an oral history that will preserve not just the facts about each item, but the passion and knowledge that made collecting them meaningful. On a particularly good day in late spring, I'm able to accompany her to the Smithsonian for the opening of the Cadi exhibition. Seeing our pieces displayed with museum-quality lighting and explanatory text, watching visitors read about the history and significance of early American perfumery gives me a sense of completion that I never expected to experience. "You did this," I tell Sophia as we stand before a case containing the 1912 Lorigan bottle that was one of my first major acquisitions. "You made it possible for all these people to understand something beautiful that might have remained hidden forever." "We did this," she corrects gently. "You collected them, and I learned to understand them. Neither of us could have accomplished this alone." 3 days later, I die peacefully in my sleep, surrounded by the scent of the vintage L'Heure Bleue that Sophia had applied to her wrists that morning. My final conscious thought is gratitude for the transformation I witnessed in my granddaughter, for the love that proved stronger than betrayal, for the second chance that allowed us to build something beautiful together. The funeral draws an unexpectedly large crowd of collectors, museum curators, and perfume enthusiasts from around the world, all of whom had been touched in some way by the collection or by Sophia's work in preserving and sharing it. During her eulogy, Sophia speaks about the power of second chances, about the importance of preserving beauty for future generations, about the lesson I taught her that true wealth lies not in possessing beautiful things, but in sharing them with others who can appreciate their value. 6 months after my death, Sophia opens the Beaumont collection to regular public tours, fulfilling a dream we'd discussed during my final weeks. The small museum we created together now serves visitors from around the world, educating them about the artistry and history of fine fragrance, while preserving the fruits of 40 years of passionate collecting. The young woman who once dismissed my interests as weird hobbies has become one of the world's leading experts on vintage perfumery, regularly consulted by auction houses, museums, and private collectors. But more importantly, she's become someone who understands that beauty and craftsmanship and history matter, that some things deserve to be preserved and treasured and passed down to future generations. Standing in the museum she's created from my collection, sharing knowledge with visitors who've traveled thousands of miles to see these treasures, Sophia often remembers that terrible night when her careless comment about mothballs nearly destroyed the most important relationship of her life. But instead of regret, she feels gratitude for the journey that brought her to this point, for the grandmother who loved her enough to give her a second chance, for the collection that taught her to see beauty where she'd once seen only old bottles. The story that began with cruelty and dismissal has ended with understanding and preservation, with a legacy that will continue long after both of us are gone. And sometimes, late at night when she's alone in the museum we built together, Sophia catches the faint scent of vintage Ambre Mystique lingering in the air, and she knows that some forms of love and beauty are indeed eternal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.